are here in Vilnius right now. Maybe you see. So this is Savicos Gatvė. This is actually a very interesting place where a lot of people decided to occupy the street and turn it into a public space, because this used to be a street where cars would drive down. And by looking at it, you'd never think that we have a COVID situation here, right?
Right, right. No, I mean, it just seems like everybody's out having a good time, man. Are people taking care of themselves?
It's great. No, people are taking care. I mean, I think we should be masking up more, because I think people are just, I think what we have is this kind of very interesting situation where on the one hand, people were confined and they want to get out and they want to have a good time and they want to kind of like get past the whole quarantine. And on the other hand, I think people feel that if they don't take care, well, then we're not really doing much for, for the future or for, for everything that should come afterwards. But at the moment, people, I think, are more in like, let's have fun today and stuff for the hangover tomorrow, in this kind of mode.
Yeah, I just hope people, I know it's a balancing act, but I just really hope that people are cautious about kind of the seriousness of COVID. I know we're all in this together, but we have to be cautious about actually preserving the future and make sure that there's no long-term effects, from not taking precautions right now.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that if you have at least one person who's not, or say a critical mass of people who aren't taking care of each other, they mess it up for everybody else. And I think that's one of the big issues we have, is that, people aren't really, it's funny where they're not really thinking about the effects and the consequences of their individual actions. They're just being very, oh, my freedom, it's all about me. But this is something that we need to tackle together.
Oh, for sure. And I think it really talks to the points that we're speaking of about the collective engagement, the collaboration with people coming together for one common goal to, face a challenge and a problem and being on the same page. And I think that's what the future actually looks like, is collaborative, So, I mean, even in this COVID days, we can see that this is a global situation, a global challenge, and everybody has to kind of chip in order to see that we make our way through this. Yeah.
That's such a curious thing, man. I've been doing Marques, I'm really happy. I want to thank you for finding the time to chat with me. As I mentioned previously, I'm helping the Lithuanian Green Party upgrade itself by creating a community of green thinkers and really progressive green ideas. And so one of the things we were touching on previously was global warming.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about education, but I was talking to some really, really interesting people in the previous weeks about global warming. And one of the most interesting conclusions of all these conversations was that it's not technology that's going to save us, that it's not some kind of policy that's going to really make a difference. It's actually conscientiousness and collective conscientiousness. And that's a really interesting message. And it came from Amanda Joy Ravenhill from Project Drawdown and the Buckminster Fuller Institute. It came from a friend of mine who used to trade carbon in Geneva, really saying that I feel that we just need to have a personal connection with our role in changing things. And so now we have COVID, which is kind of a smaller test of that. And I'm thinking, look, let's bring this into the theme of education immediately, and let's talk about that. Let's talk about education, but let's begin from that kind of collective consciousness and how we need to build that, and we need to find different ways of people interfacing with other people for us to be resilient and prosperous in the 21st century.
Man, you hit it on the head. I mean, it's really about that collaborative effort. And it's really about kind of raising the global consciousness. And then you mentioned something that's really critical, is actually creating and maintaining that the earth is a stakeholder in all these decisions, that we actually include the earth, when we're thinking about all these grand plans for the future, that we're speaking about the organism of the earth being included in those conversations. So when we speak of the collective, it's all of the humans, but it's all of the other biological things that are supporting human life, which are the earth. And then we talk about technology. you know, what better piece of technology than the billions and billions of years of iterations of the earth actually creating everything that we need in order to actually not only survive, but to thrive, you know, in the future. So, um, you know, looking at those ancient ways of living and then mapping that on a future for the future of technology and the future of education, the future of work, I think go synonymous and are very, very symbiotic.
That's beautiful, brother, because your whole journey, and you work with the World Education Foundation, right? And
Yeah.
I was looking into that, and one of the angles you have is very tribal, and one you began your experience actually by going to Africa after you understood that being part of the NFL, being a Green Bay Packer, wasn't completely fulfilling you, right? So
Right.
tell me about how you got into education by visiting a very tribal, very rural, very underdeveloped environment. How did that journey begin for you?
So I think the journey was always kind of germinated in me since I was little. I always wondered, you know, what we needed to learn as a human population in order to thrive in the future. And I think through sports, you know, was the first time that I was able to connect all of those things that I was seeing kind of in these higher dimensions and actually embody them in what I was doing physically. And then through that, as I got older, I started to see that education was a very critical place and part to creating this thriving that I saw for for humanity as well as the earth. And what better place to be than kind of going and diving into these tribal, ancestral places of wisdom that have been able to understand how to survive not only over the past couple hundred years, but for millennia, for thousands of years, and that there's an embedded wisdom and there's embedded education that's in there that we can tap into that's ultimately um, you know, going to give us the clues on actually how to sustain ourselves in the future. And I think the World Education Foundation just really came from me diving in and actually having conversations and seeing different perspectives and understanding cultures and language and geographical differences. And then also seeing the connectedness, the connected tissue that is between us and humans. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that we are all connected in some way, in some shape, in some form. So, you know, that's what really intrigued me about that.
Dude, do me a favor. Share your elevator pitch for the World Education Foundation. Like, how do you explain it real quick to people who have no idea what it's about?
Sure, yeah. So the World Education Foundation, what we do is bridge the gap between academia, technology, and local implementation. So ultimately, what we want to do is mobilize information from the academic space and create this two-way connection that is moving that information out of those ivory towers and really starting to understand how do we map that on the ancient wisdom that is already in these local communities, and then have a cross-pollination of ideas where you know you have these theories but then you also have practice, and then if they can learn from each other, then you can actually utilize technology as a bridge to ultimately create new solutions that can help us thrive in the future.
All right, that sounds really pretty, but I'm trying to understand how do we get that done, right? I
Yeah.
really understand and I agree. There is maybe like ancient programming, there's ancient wisdom, there's ancient knowledge that we have that is really fundamental for us to thrive like now. I was speaking to Esther Wojcicki a couple of days ago. She's an educator, she's a wonderful woman. And one of the things she speaks about is about letting people just be human, right?
Mm.
And we were discussing how we think about institutional change in terms of changing the infrastructure,
Mm.
investing in curriculum, and she's saying no, we need to change the way people are relating to one another. So how do you bring that tribal wisdom, how do you bring that reprogramming into the equation?
Yeah, sure. So I can give you one example. Back in 2016, I dropped down in Iraq, northern part of Kurdistan, and ultimately I was working with a Syrian refugee community called Domes. And what we did was first we talked to them, and then we actually built trust with the youth that were there as well as the elders. Like really tried to understand what the challenges were and what the problems that they were facing. Then we actually gave a curriculum to the youth where we ran them through a workshop that helped them to understand how to do a needs assessment. So they went out and they gathered their own data within the community and had conversations with their community members. And through that process, they were able to understand what the actual challenges were, brought them back into the workshop. Then we iterated a small level solution that was focused on the vertical that they were interested in. And then after that, they pitched it to the rest of the community for this cross-pollination where the elders could chip in and say, hey, you know what, we dealt with this back in, whenever, and we think that, you guys should actually approach this challenge in this way. And then they iterated off of those solutions or those questions and then came up with solutions that were pertaining to their individual community. So it was really learning and teaching these youth not only how to identify a problem, but ultimately have the processes to solving that challenge. And that changed everything for their mindset. So from whatever challenge that they created from here on out, they already had the tools to actually approach that different challenge.
So you have a process, you have a methodology, but at the end of the day, what you're also saying is that you need to have the trust. You need to bring the people in. They need to do the work. I mean, it's very curious because it's not an easily scalable process, is it? I mean, you really have to make human connections. You need to create those spaces where people can be empowered, or where they can do what they have to do. How do you inspire other educators to do this? Because I mean, this is something I don't know. Is it possible to systemize this, or is it something where you really need a person getting engaged and in the process?
Yeah, I think the process is the engagement, because actually once somebody goes through these processes, then they understand them and they embody them. And it's almost becomes part of their DNA and their culture. So when they're
Right.
actually solving different challenges for other people, they can already integrate, what they've learned, through these processes and deliver those forward. So it's almost kind of like train the trainer or teach the teacher
Of course.
type of framework where, once you go through the program, and you have this orientation, then you can take it forward.
Lovely. I mean, I believe that too. I think culture is fluid and contagious. And if you have some people, you have a critical mass of people adopt the culture and create that space, then people will take that with them. But let me ask you, then concretely, say we're here in Lithuania, where we have issues with trust. We have serious issues with trust here. And we have serious issues with, I think, people feeling, I don't know if it's a Soviet thing or where we have still kind of remnants of that, but it's very difficult to get people empowered and moving and have them feel that they are the architects of their own future. How would you solve that problem in a very grassroots way? How could we help get people, adopting this methodology more or making those changes?
Yeah, I think a lot of movements actually come from the grassroots,
Mm-hmm.
and they ultimately are manifested by small individuals, small groups that create this nexus of what the future actually looks like. I think a lot of us sometimes think that individually we don't have the power to change the things that needed to be changed. But I think it could start with one person, it start with one group, and really start to consolidate around the needs of, like, say, the teachers. What kind of teachers do you want to have, that are educating the future? What kind of
Right.
leaders do you want to have that are actually concerned with what the future is? And then how do you create the spaces that actually hold, these ideas to actually be implemented? And I think through that lineage, you can understand, how to move forward, that it starts with a small person, but ultimately you can push the ideas that are going to sustain for the future. So I think grassroots, getting together with people that are like-minded, that want to see a better future, you can start there and then start to push the leadership, to start doing the things that are necessary.
So get the teachers involved, bring them into a space, empower them. Also maybe give them, are there any kind of resources? Because one thing, I agree with you in the fact that a human exposure to the processes and to the culture is probably the best way of adopting it. But I guess there's also tons of resources online to help these people, right?
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, and there's resources. I mean, we live in a 21st century technological age. You know, a lot of people are becoming cyborgs, and that's what I actually studied a lot was, you know, how do people integrate with technology? Like we have so many resources out there, but I think more importantly than the technology is the ability and the capacity to inquire. You know, so if I'm on Google, I have to ask the right questions in order to get the information that I want. So,
Right.
you know, having the capacity to think of an idea, formulate that idea, and really come up with the terminology that I can access that information, I think is a lot more important than just having the technology at hand. Because technology is only a tool, but it's only, you know, it's the human inspiration, and it's the human inquiry that's going to ask those right questions that can change the future.
Isn't that amazing though, man? It's so funny because now we're all looking for simple solutions, and here there is no simple solution. You just have to do the work.
Hmm.
I remember, I think it was Kjell Nordstrom. He's a futurist from, I think he's from Norway, he's a Scandinavian guy, but he was saying that one of the issues with knowledge is that factual and technical knowledge will become cheaper and is
Hmm.
becoming continually cheaper. Tacit knowledge, where somebody has to teach you,
Hmm.
is becoming much more expensive. Like somebody sharing the knowledge, showing you how to play a guitar string, somebody. And I guess we could also include kind of like human knowledge, where we're actually talking about empathy, trust, how to collaborate, how to understand a person's feelings. And this is something where there's no shortcuts. You just need somebody to invest the time and to do it more. So at the end of the day, the key stakeholders here are the teachers, the educators, which have to make those grassroots changes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important, you know, I mean, I read one report where 85% of the jobs that are going to be here by 2030 don't even exist yet. You
Yeah.
know, so how do you actually tell a teacher to teach a child, you know, for something that they don't even know is going to be in the future? And I think what you do there is really teach people about processes, how to actually identify a challenge, identify a problem, and then give them the tools to actually solve that challenge. And then the more challenges that they solve, their repository becomes larger and larger to solve bigger and broader challenges. And I think that comes from the teacher, is that they teach them to facilitate, you know, where it's going from just like me passing on information to you, but teachers being more facilitators through a learning process. Because, you know, children, they learn in different ways. We all learn in different ways. You know, some are vocal, some are auditory, some are, you know,
Mhm.
but learn by doing. Some people learn by seeing. And I think tapping into how we learn the best to solve challenges will ultimately open up, um, you know, multiple possibilities for the future and when it comes to education and work.
I'm super curious. All right. So we know that empowerment of teachers is important, right? That's first and foremost. Get those people involved. Eh, when we're talking about institutional things, let's talk about things on an institutional level. What, or just take the States, because like you're from the States, you know that situation really well. What are the most detrimental things on a systemic level that have to change?
Well, there's so many, but I think first and foremost is giving the teachers the opportunity and the resources to actually engage with their children. And then, you know, here in the States, we're still, you know, going through COVID-19. So online learning, like finding new ways and new methodologies that are going to engage kids over through a digital device. You know, how do we create those parameters that are ultimately going to help kids connect in a way where learning is fruitful and it's collaborative. And I think, you know, ultimately is looking at what are the future industries that need to be created in order to make sure that we are thinking about the earth, we're thinking about the future of work, we're thinking about each other, and we're thinking about the policies that are going to drive the future. Um, so I think, you know, some of the biggest things in the U.S. are really about supporting teachers, as well as supporting spaces that are teaching kids how to actually learn for the future.
Like the non-traditional spaces, right?
Yeah, the informal spaces, exactly. Yeah.
All right, brother, let me ask you a trick question here. In our society, many people directly value what has a high price, right? They
Mhm.
say, oh, that's an expensive car, that's a good car. oh, that guy, he's like, he's one of the most expensive lawyers. He's an accomplished lawyer. And teachers, they don't get paid very much. And so it becomes a conundrum where I think you have issues of maybe also self-worth and not even self-worth, but they're not respected or given the merit that they deserve in society. How do you think we can solve that? Do you think that there should be like a special kind of like, it's about paying them more? It's like, how do you make education a more prestigious profession?
Hmm. Well, I think it's really kind of framing it in that it is a prestigious profession, and then I think through that terminology you start to change the ideology of what it is. But I think pay and compensation are really big, and I think it's about incentivizing teachers to learn more. They said that the average student or the average student right now is going to have 7 different professions when they get into the career job. There's no longer kind of this long lineage of 30 years being at the same job doing the same thing.
Right.
It's really about how do you facilitate different ways of learning throughout a lifelong journey of learning. And I think the teachers need to understand that it's all about facilitation, that is prestigious, that you have to hold space, and that it is important that somebody goes through those opportunities to hold those spaces for people that are learning.
Right.
So the future is really about promoting teachers that understand how to facilitate learning, not just in one phase or one subject, but over a lineage of different subjects.
But that's a curious thing because, like, I mean, a lot of people will say, I can't afford to be a teacher. Right? They'll say, I can't. I have higher material expectations. So do we really expect them to be holy, kind of like holy people who are above the material and sacrifice themselves? Or it's a curious thing. I mean, even in the United States, you have this whole issue with school districts, which are completely differently funded, and depending on neighborhoods and all of this. And that can even create a question because I know that a lot of teachers decide to go to neighborhoods where it's needed most, and they're the people who are sacrificing themselves. I mean, maybe we should just start looking at them as holy humans. I wish there was a question here rather than just an analysis of a problem.
Yeah, but I also think that teachers, they can have the opportunity to monetarily support themselves by, being more project based. So if I'm teaching a group of students and then ultimately, they grow up to create projects, then somehow, some way that knowledge is appreciated through the results of that knowledge that has been created or, sold or produced into a service or something that actually generates back into the educational system in which
Right.
taught them how to create those solutions. Yeah.
That's interesting. Like what if we taught teachers entrepreneurship, and
Yeah.
said, the way a rich person can be lofty and a little bit altruistic with their time, like say, hey, maybe there should be a diversification there. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if that can work, or if it would just bring about more. Well, here's a curious thing: if the teachers become more business savvy and a little bit more conscientious of the real value of their time and their effort, and they started to charge more, demand better rights, or something happened, maybe that would escalate the price to what it's really worth. I mean, I'm what I'm saying. I'm kind of against it because I think that the over monetization and commodification of 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 resources that I think are what's the word I'm looking for? Priceless.
Hmm.
Resources that are priceless is one of the things that's really got us fucked. Um, but that's a question. It's like how do you actually bring balance to that? I mean, but we have that in with many other things, with wildlife, which we don't pay a price for. We have the same thing with our natural resources that they're cheap because we don't pay for a price on that. I'm trying to figure that out. Like how do you get? Should it start from them? Should it start from other people?
Well, I think it should start from the people that drive policy. Like if you can actually create a military industrial complex, you can create an educational industrial complex.
Right.
So it's about where you weigh your value of being a knowledge-based society. You know, so if you rather be a knowledge-based society and actually protect and to make sure that your citizens are thriving, then you would actually invest more in education and make sure that the teachers were well compensated, that they're not stressed, that they have the resources that they need in order to teach the future. And I think the countries that understand that the most moving forward are going to be the most successful in the long run, because we
And they
no longer live in kind of an isolated situation. We live in a dynamic, cross-bordered type of community, a global community, and that cross collaboration is going to spawn new ideas that are going to create those monetary advantages that, you know, can be supported by what the governments actually invest in. And if that's education, then they'll see the results with that within a generation.
right. That's interesting. Yeah, maybe there's no shortcuts to this. I mean, Scandinavian countries pay their teachers quite well, and they're very respected. I remember I got into a curious conversation with a woman. She's a beautiful burner, right? And so she's also like a hippie, an artist, and she's like, I'm like, what do you do? I was like, oh, I'm a school teacher. I do this and that, and I make. And then she has this whole project called Shitopia, where they fix up bathrooms. So like you enter a bathroom and it's this whole kind of artistic experience. And I started telling her, wow, you could sell this and then you could kind of market it like this and that. And she started looking at me like I was crazy, because she felt that her teaching job was the main way she was creating value for her community. And this was just a side job. And she was even, I think she even got a little bit offended when I said that, you know, you can make a lot more money doing that. And she's like, it's not about the money. I felt like a complete jackass, actually. Let me ask you, Marques, where do you think education is most critical? At what level?
Early learning. You know, teaching a small child probably around 6 to 9, and really giving them the foundation to be learners, and giving them the confidence that learning is fun, and giving them the understanding that even though that they may learn differently than other students, that they have potential. You know, I think in early ages, we kind of have these mechanisms where we're pumping these kids out into this like industrial complex to understand that they have a value through the work that they do, but ultimately not fostering their creativity and their imagination and where they would want to go. So I think those early years of formulation that actually create the catalyst for lifelong learning has to be injected in them at a young age. And I think once they get the confidence to learn and understand how to learn, then, you know, sky's the limit. And then they'll have the motivation and the inspiration to learn for however long that they need to.
Tell me about a teacher who left a lifelong impression on you.
You know, I'd have to say teachers, I think you know, teachers come in all shapes, forms, and sizes, and I would have to say my mentor,
Mm-hmm.
you know, was probably the person that left the deepest impact on me. His name was Dirk van Berkel. He was out of the Netherlands. He was an aviation expert, and he was really one of the reasons why I actually made a transition from football to what I do now, because he, for one, believed in me. He saw me as a person, but also he believed in the intelligence and the intellectual curiosity that I had. So he opened up his experiences to all the things that I was interested in. When he saw me as a person, I felt confident enough to make that transition and then start learning about a whole plethora of new things that I was interested in. And I think through that confidence, of him just kind of taking me under his wing, it gave me the foundation and the stability to just say, you know what, I'm a lifelong learner. I'm here to learn as much as possible. And the things that I need to learn, you know, I just asked, you know, the universe to put those things in my life. But I think that confidence, you know, of him seeing me as a person and then also opening up his experiences and his wisdom
Mm-hmm.
to me really helped me through my journey.
I was curious because we moved from talking about younger kids and their need for positive experience at an early age for future development, and then we moved on to say people our age, right?
Mhm.
Which, I mean, we've realized how much we can benefit from mentors, and even education at an older age. One of the things which I've realized, which is super important for me, and even taking part, say in groups or in networks like Hatch and other networks we're both part of in, is that you can get a lot of micro mentoring, or you can get a lot of information and guidance from people. It doesn't matter if they're older or younger, just people who've been down that path. And I'm wondering whether this kind of micro mentoring, or this concept where we become a little bit more open to learning at a later age, may also be key for success, not for the educational system, but for our society in general. I mean, thinking about people, we're going to live longer, most likely. And if we want to really be, I don't know, we want to be empowered and we want to be the best we want to be, we actually need a lot of help from our peers. And and I at least feel that I can expand just because I still feel as a child. And you mentor a lot. And so tell me, what are the key lessons for a person who's helping older people and for mentoring?
Yeah, I think mentoring is critical and key in every aspect of learning. Not having to reinvent the wheel every time you approach a challenge, by leaning on somebody who's already been there and done that, is so important. And I think there needs to be more critical analysis of how important mentoring is. And I think there needs to be more people, but sometimes people don't feel like they have the balance to actually take care of their own business as well as pass on knowledge at the same time.
Right.
So what I would do is just encourage people to really look at how important mentoring is and see how you can actually create the next generation of learners that can push your ideas forward by actually seeding that into the younger generation, to see that this is what my gift to pass on to the next generation, to secure that the earth stays intact. So I just believe that mentoring is quite critical, especially at a young age, and then ultimately having lifelong learning through that aspect.
You're saying you can learn mentoring at a young age. What does that mean? Like actually just being able to hold someone's hand through an educational transformative process? Is that what you're referring to?
Well, all mentoring is really collaborating, right? It's about exchanging ideas.
Uh,
So I think even at a young age, as long as I learn something and I pass that on, that's a form of mentorship. So it doesn't really matter like kind of how old you are. If I have a bit of knowledge and I actually gift that to you, or I tell you, this is the ways that I did it, maybe let's cross-pollinate and really collaborate on ways forward to do it differently in the future, then that's a form of mentorship. And then mentorship turns into collaboration,
Got
because
it.
the younger generation, they might see your challenge differently because they have different tools to work
Of
with.
course.
So the mentorship goes both ways as well. So it's not just about a linear way that I'm, older than you, so I have more knowledge than you. It's about learning in both directions.
That's so interesting. It's like so you have this asymmetric and sometimes a relationship of teacher and student, which goes both ways, right? It's a kind of a
For
mutualistic
sure.
then relationship. I'm super curious. I really think that that's super important. I mean, and there's so many people around me which you feel they're stuck in a rut. They're like, I want to move on, I want to do something more, and they don't even feel safe enough to ask questions. They don't know who to ask those questions, right? To and I think really acknowledging our vulnerability, especially the older you get, it becomes very difficult. And sometimes
Hmm.
saying that you don't know, I've understood it to be a virtue. There's a very interesting study. I can't remember what it was, but they were discussing how the leaders of tomorrow are the people who admit they don't know, and
Sure.
that at least allows them to ask for better questions. So we're actually talking about a whole culture of people being in a learning mood, in a mentoring mood. That's a cool idea. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. And then that also really sets the stage for curiosity, and that's what learning is. All learning is having the ability to be curious about something and then having the steps to find out about that thing. So really kind of pushing at a young age and setting the space. And I think that's what teachers actually should start to focus on, is really creating the space for that curiosity and that adventure and the way of thinking big, but holding that space where they can do that. Like, I remember being a child and I dreamed of all of the things that could possibly be. But then as you get older, you start to become more and more confined into, all right, what does society want from you? But if you're able to hold that curiosity beyond that point, then you can start to look at all of the possibilities and really kind of create and keep that freedom of thought and that freedom of curiosity that can open up so many different worlds, as we get older.
That's lovely. You know, yeah, not just meeting up with your friends to have a beer, but also looking for a way to open up to educational growth and learning and expansion of consciousness. That's a
Yeah, and
curious thing. But I think we're driven by that, Marcus. I mean, I don't know about you, but the reason I go to all these, conferences, micro conferences, and take part in all these organizations and networks is because I feel that I can give and receive, at some point, and that my knowledge doesn't grow by accumulating, I don't know, terabytes of information, but mostly about a constant interchange where you say this is needed there, that's needed, that, and actually belonging to a broader uh, network of consciousness.
yeah. And I think, also, it's interesting. We're both involved with Hatch, and Hatch, has a program called Next Gen,
Yeah,
and Next Generation, where they're actually fostering the younger kids and teaching them these tools at an early age. And I think that's so important because, an organization like Hatch actually gives value to the things that the next generation have to say. And I
right.
think that's one thing that we have to start to understand, that just because we're older doesn't mean that there's less value in the things that younger people have and the tools that they have, because they see the
Exactly.
world from a different way.
Exactly. It expands the perspective. Exactly. It
It,
expands the perspective. I mean,
and
and and it's curious because people will say, "Oh no, why are you going to ask these kids about their opinion?" It's like when actually they can just bring a completely different focus to the table. So that's right. Completely right. Listen, we have a couple of questions.
yeah,
Let's say Maria Chivas, she's asking, how do we teach children the proper values, skills, and understanding that is necessary for them to thrive and make a difference in today's society when those values aren't enforced in their homes?
yeah. Yeah, and I think that, that's a great question, Maria. And I think, that gets back to, it takes a village, and it takes, if
It
and it
takes
gets
a
back
village
to
to
that
raise a child, right?
kinship, right? Of exactly, and concept is that the resources from one particular place, that it is our responsibility as a global community to teach those skills. It wants to live in these like isolated boxes nowadays, but
Yes.
actually understand that your responsibility to society is.
Oh, brother, you broke up. Sorry, could you repeat the last sentence because
I'm here.
you
Yeah. No, I was
so
just saying that, it's important for, go ahead.
no. I It's like you were on fire and the connection went dead. So just recap those last two sentences.
Yeah, no, I was just explaining that, ultimately it is a village, and I think as we understand that it is our responsibility to pass on our knowledge and really get outside of our just own silos and pass that knowledge on to people that aren't necessarily directly within our homes and in our families, that's just as important to creating and operating a really conscious society as anything else.
But that's so curious. I mean, there's several vectors there, right? Like the first vector is that really the home has become such a closed unit because of what you were talking about, people living in boxes and like very sterile environments, and and saying this is where we're socializing, aside from the screens, and what we're getting through them. But then there's the other thing, is like we're actually being accountable for our neighbors, and for the people around us and for our broader communities. That's a
Yeah.
really curious thing. That's a very because people are being trained now, like, to mind their own fucking business. It's like I'm raising my kid the way, however I want, and I know that you can incur in liability and in all kinds of legal trouble if you start telling some other person's kid what he should do or shouldn't do, which isn't the
hmm
case in Europe still. But I mean, just to show you the trend.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you. But I think it's an opportunity for us to guide and to nudge. It's not necessarily telling them what to do. It's really about like, hey, look at it from this perspective. What if you were, and I know a lot of people that mentors that have been through life struggles and that have suffered from things that go back into the communities in which they were raised and really pass on that knowledge and give them the understanding that these are the mistakes that I made, and you can avoid these mistakes by listening to my story. It's not necessarily telling them what to do. It's about just listen to my story, have
Just
that
listen.
platform to listen to my story, and then ultimately. But one thing that and Brandy, she just brought it up. But trauma, I
Yeah.
think that is so important. Because we all suffer from some sorts of trauma. Just being alive and being human, we are traumatized in so many different ways. And I think having more attention to mental health, and understanding that trauma could be a barrier to our learning. It opens up fascinating ways to start to heal not only this life, but past lives and
Yeah.
generational traumas and hurts that can open up that space to being more vulnerable in that learning apparatus.
Oh man, completely.
Yeah.
And that's one of the crazy. It's like I like to think about often healing. It's kind of like itches you can't scratch on your own. Sometimes you need somebody, to reach that place which you can't get to, or which
Yeah.
sometimes often you didn't know what was hurting. Somebody has to come and help you out. But that's where
Sure.
that kind of collective accountability is so important, where people can actually feel that it's not just about the way I feel, it's about how the other people in my community feel, which actually demands also elevated consciousness. Yeah, thanks, Brandy, for bringing that up. So, brother, listen, you've been on this call with me for 40 minutes. I'm really happy. I'm glad you took the time to talk to me. But let me ask you, what are the main takeaways of this conversation? Like, if I had to turn this into ideas, into attractive, pitchable ideas for the Lithuanian audience, for people to get inspired, I mean, what would be the main ones that we touched upon today?
Yeah, I think it's really about understanding how learning and the spaces of learning are pushed forward. And I think it's really about supporting the educators, giving them the apparatus to have the resources to actually push forward with the educators. And then also grassroots, having understanding of what the people want and what they demand, and really pushing and putting in the leaders that are going to support those aspirations. And
Right.
I think thirdly, it's really about, really calling upon this collective care, from the community, and this mutual aid, and this healing process that goes through learning, where education is that point of healing. And then if we can get to a point of healing through those mechanisms, then, we create these knowledge societies that are good for the state, that are good for individuals, and good for the community and the global community at hand.
Lovely. So we have empowered teachers. We have
Hmm.
empowered teachers, which need to be invested in personally, because they're the foot soldiers. They're the people who are gonna win this war through classroom style trench warfare. One trench at a time. And we have a whole issue of really thinking collectively, that there
Hmm.
has to be a broader understanding, right, of the whole problem, and that education is something which goes beyond the classroom and also
Hmm.
touches on civic affairs. And we also have this issue where it's both ways, right? We talked about the mentorship, which has changed that whole kind of paradigm where the teacher is always teaching and not learning from the students as well. That was really interesting thing we touched upon. And yeah, man, that's plenty. That's plenty to
And
digest.
And then I think if we're thinking about policy, it's really about this participatory action. It's like really talk to the community members, have these politicians that are crafting these educational models, talk to the communities in which they're serving, and start to get this cross collaboration of what's needed from the community, as well as what the future it looks like, from an industrious aspect. And I think if you merge those two of what people want and what is needed in the future, then you can start to come up with creative models and policies that actually support that type of thriving.
It's amazing. That's amazing, brother. It was lovely talking to you. I look forward to seeing you soon in the future. I hope
Likewise,
COVID is takes a hike and understands that we could do without it, and so we can meet up
definitely.
soon and talk in person. Thank you for your time and for your beautiful presence. And
Yeah, thank you, Jurgen.
brother, take care. We'll be in touch until we meet again. And
Definitely.
I'd like to thank Yoga Jared and Brandy for being so active and also sharing her her insights. All right, brother. Take care.
All right. Thank you, Jurgis. Peace.